Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Church Leadership Lab, where we get to have conversations to help empower healthy churches. That's what we are excited about. That's what we love doing. And we'd love to ask you if this is helpful, if you learn, if you grow, if you don't mind leaving a review, subscribing, sharing a link. That always helps us get more conversations into the ears of more church leaders. Today, I'm really excited to have a conversation with Brad Hill. Brad has been deeply involved in solving technology challenges for the church for over 20 years. He serves on the executive team at Gloo and is responsible for marketing, sales, success, just all facets of growing and serving Gloo's network of churches, networks, and faith partners. Now, prior to Gloo, Brad actually co-founded Ministry Brands, which I'm super thankful for. And under Brad's leadership, really grew Ministry Brands into the world's largest church ministry technology company. Now, in addition to his experience starting, building, coaching companies for the kingdom and for business impact, Brad also has served in lay leadership at several churches across multiple denominations. He lives in the Denver, Colorado area with his wife and 2 kids. Brad, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, Scott, it's a pleasure. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, listen, one thing we like to do, obviously that's the public bio, and that hits the highlights, but I always know there's something that doesn't make the public bio that all your friends and family would know about you. So what is that? What would that be for you?
Wow. Man, two things maybe, in terms of like party stories or what have you. So on a positive note, I have been the DJ for over 1,000 weddings. That's maybe
seriously.
Yeah. One of my earlier businesses I started before I got into this whole church tech thing was doing that. And then
I love that.
Maybe another factoid that my wife and teenage daughters never let me down for is I like to back into every parking space.
Okay. Now
that's just like a thing for me.
I
don't mean to get divisive on here, but that's,
Well, I don't mind strong opinions on the show, first of all. Second of all, I'm with you on that. And it is like the ultimate dad move, I feel like.
Totally.
But third, I actually, years and years ago, I had a position where it involved a ton of driving, and just part of the corporate policy was a driver training, like safety thing. And it was a sort of official program nationally. And they were like always either back in or try and pull forward in a spot so that you could then pull out, because it's the safest way to exit a parking spot. So
that's right. The pull forward would be like the poor man's back in is exactly how I think about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now the DJ thing, I love that, first of all, because I feel like that's one of those jobs where, I'm sure it gets tedious, but you're essentially the life of the party everywhere you show up.
I hope so. Yeah. And yeah, no like real bridezilla stories, but super fun to, and a little bit germane to today's conversation, because when I started that business, I was carrying crates of records around. I'm not like a, scratcher DJ, but we saw the evolution to CDs, and then finally, praise God, to laptops, and carrying it all with you. So that was kind of fun through the ages. But yeah, you're trying to read the room, and if you don't serve the crowd, things don't go well.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, we're going to we ask a question to our final 5 always. What's the last thing you listened to? So I'm even more excited about what that answer is going to be. But what we're really excited to talk about today, Brad, is technology and the church. And you've had such a front row seat to that for so many years, and still currently do. So love to jump in and really, as you look at the landscape of technology in the church, I'd love to hear 2 things. One, what excites you? What are you looking at with tons of optimism? And then also on the other hand, what gives you pause? Like, what are some things that you're maybe a little hesitant about?
Sure. Well, as I sometimes look back over those years, those decades that you referenced, there's been a couple different like waves of technology, and maybe some of the leaders listening can relate to going back prior to the internet. Even just the idea of having like technology to manage parts of my church was kind of a new concept. then we did see the rise of the World Wide Web, and cautiously using that maybe first for a website or marketing my church. And then when things hit the cloud, right, we really started to see a pretty rapid evolution of, man, I can use these tools and I can use technology to keep better track of my people. We saw things like online giving and, mobile apps and all the things, you guys, Ministry Brands obviously is right in the middle of all that. I'm encouraged that the use of technology in ministry is really much more normalized now. Now, what is true is, a lot of the smaller church starts, or maybe even more mature but smaller churches, don't have still a lot of those tools. I just last week ran across a pastor who is managing his church out of Gmail. Those folks are out there, we know.
Yeah.
But I think it's not novel. It's not like, an interesting concept anymore to use technology in ministry. And for that, I would say that feels like a positive trend. Mm-hmm. Now on the concerning side, and I think today maybe we want to get into a little bit of what's on the horizon with things like AI. Yep. Or whatever's next. We have this habit in the church, and that goes for Christians, but especially vocational, clergy, et cetera. When a new technology emerges, we sort of have this spectrum of how we respond. Mm. And I saw this with the internet and online giving and the cloud, et cetera. Some of us race straight toward it, almost blindly, like, yes, new, shiny, I'm here for it.
Yeah.
And then there's this opposite extreme, right, which says anything new is bad. This is clearly of the work of Satan. Like, I'm not going near it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the thoughtful response is really where we want to live and figure out, it's not the technology per se is good or bad, but we need to be thoughtful on how we use it. And I think we still have work to do in the church and in leadership in really forming that thoughtful response where you could literally plug and play any new technology in, and we sort of have a framework for how to respond. And so that's I think the work that we're excited to lean into.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really, honestly, a really good call out, because this is probably not, we're probably not approaching the end of, technological innovation. Things continue to move and have, whether you look at the printing press to the radio to the internet to all of it. And so understanding how do you just think about adopting these as a church leader, I think is really helpful. I'm curious, are there maybe some benchmarks or is there a framework that you've seen people adopt that's really kind of a healthy way to think about new technology?
Well, one of the things that we hold fast to at Gloo, in fact, it's on our walls, is a statement about relationships. Mm-hmm. And, our belief, our contention is that God has wired all of us to really do the work of ministry and ourselves even to grow and be discipled. We do that in the context always of a relationship with someone else or a group of people sometimes. So when we turn then to technology, or for that matter, other tools like content or the use of buildings or whatever the things are, our simple phrase is relationships catalyze growth. Mm. So it's not the technology or the app that causes me to grow. It's not the small group study or the sermon, although those things are super helpful and they can be great tools on this. But we would always say that the relationship is the center.
Yeah.
So like as we evaluate some new technology, shiny object that comes to bear, the first lens or the question I would always look through is this helping me support the relationship? Is this in some way empowering that person? We call that person a frontline champion who's championing the growth of another person. How can this tool help the champion do more of or do what they're doing more effectively? So there's other ancillary questions, but to me, that's the center. If we ever get that wrong, right? If we ever displace the relationship with technology or tool, I can promise you, like that's going to be a recipe for trouble.
Yeah. I think that's so important because that often is the concern. Is you hear often, AI is going to replace everybody, or and they're at the base level. There's a fear of what does this mean for us as image bearers of God, who are created to live in relation with other human beings and not necessarily artificial beings or AI and stuff like that. So I think that's a really helpful place to at least start processing for people. We are gonna jump into it as far as things like AI, what's on the horizon. Now I know the world of AI isn't necessarily brand new, but it does seem to have reached kind of a new pace, a new focus, and things like generative AI and all of that is really growing. So what are some of the ways that you see AI affecting just kind of the big C church? Maybe we can start there.
Sure. Well, I think I might even go up a level briefly and just say, how is AI affecting culture?
Yeah.
Because any of us as Jesus followers, we exist right within the culture and the time God's placed us. And you're right. AI is not a new technology itself academically, but we all just kind of woke up in the last year, especially with the rise of generative AI tools.
Yeah.
Chat GPT, et cetera. And so with culture, we see AI affecting like every part of our world. My kids are hearing lectures from their teachers right now about don't use Chat GPT to write your essay. And, we see it being used in healthcare and engineering and et cetera. So, actually one of the things that we as Christian leaders get to grapple with is this new tool is out, like the genie's out of the bottle. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, if you can embrace the idea that technology is amoral, meaning it's neither good nor bad, and I know there's some debate on that point, but if we just go with it for a minute, what's true is there's a lot of good, productive uses in society, and yes, there will definitely be nefarious uses as well, just like every other technology. So if those of us that are following Jesus and are, journeyers in this faith journey, so to speak, we want to use it for good. We want to use it redemptively. Shouldn't then those of us in the church have every tool available to us to expand the kingdom? Because the world, the secular stations of culture are already there. They're already using it. Right. And so that's another phrase we use quite a bit here at Gloo is when we see a new technology emerge and we're thinking about, should we use this in the church? We don't actually believe that it's optional. Now, that doesn't mean that we blindly embrace everything, but we believe that the church should have every tool possible to help it expand its mission and to reach one more. And so we believe it's not just a good idea, but it's a moral imperative.
Yeah.
So, the church using technology is a moral imperative. The work for all of us then is, okay, if we want to use these tools to reach people, how should we do that? And what are the proper safeguards and guardrails that we should put up for ourselves?
Yeah. I'd love if we then can kind of zoom in a little bit further on that, because I would say there's a lot of people listening, who fall into that bucket of, I'm not so sure about this. And speaking about AI in particular, who are church leaders who are like maybe a little hesitant, not sure, how do I use this? What does this, mean for me? So what are some ways that AI can actually serve the local church, serve the ministry like how can church leaders, pastors kind of embrace this as a tool for ministry, especially with kind of that paradigm of like, we need to embrace all the tools possible to reach as many as we can?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, there's been some recent research. We did a study here at Gloo. Our friends at the Barna Group have done some great work this year. And when we ask questions as broadly as like, how can I use AI or should I use AI? That term AI is still very little understood by folks. And it's influenced even by some of the big scary headlines we may see out there. So I think it's helpful to actually break it down a little bit more bite-sized. And for example, we're already seeing AI-powered tools starting to emerge that really assist with very practical, very routine tasks, administrative things, right? Like apps that can help me take the sermon I just preached and repurpose it for social media, or a tool that can help me write a small group guide. So we're seeing already on the market a lot of great tools that are helping me with like content processing, or maybe even some administrative around synthesizing data.
Yeah.
Those are really interesting practical uses. And that feels like maybe this first wave. Then we think maybe beyond just the administrative tasks, you're starting to see some ideas bubble up about the use of AI-powered tools to recommend steps or maybe journeys that folks could follow in discipleship or spiritual practices like prayer, Bible reading. Again, really careful here to never have technology encroach in the space of relationship, right? Whether that's with another discipler, frontline champion, or let's not forget, like relationship with God.
Yep.
But we think that maybe there's a generation of tools on the horizon that might help me know what would be for me in my stage of growth and where God's working on me the most. How could I get access to the right next book, next study, Bible passage, what have you? So going from administrative to maybe more spiritual growth and practice. And then, we also have our eye on a third final kind of phase, if you will, which is, for those of us who understand the technology, there's, a very significant engine, this large language model that lives underneath all these tools. And today, things like OpenAI, Anthropic, other tools are ingesting lots of content from secular sources. And so when we use ChatGPT, it's not necessarily worldly or biblical, but it's also not quite unbiased. And so we see value and we see a need really for there to be a large language model and or layers on top of that do run through a biblical lens, that have God's word, God's truth influencing the output we see. That's some difficult, hard work. The good news is there's some good teams already working on that, but we see over the next, 12 to 36 months that we may have a more biblically informed engine to then rest all these tools on top of. And I think that's when we can start to rest a little bit easier in things like theological accuracy, or the work of the Spirit as it relates to how we would use this technology.
Yeah. I've used, a fair amount of the tools even we've mentioned, and even some sort of designed for church leaders, oftentimes just to see what is this about, how does this work, just to understand it. And I definitely have seen a bit of, if it's based off of kind of the language model that is, like you said, is not necessarily unbiased, that it can still produce a result that can be helpful to start with, and then you can need to kind of put it through a filter. But that's really interesting, I think, to think about what if the language model actually could be based off of the same worldview that we as church leaders, Jesus followers, are looking through, and then how do you kind of apply some of that? I think that's really exciting, especially as you mentioned the tools that, even just at a base level, creating small group questions, taking a sermon and synthesizing it down to a blog post or an email to recap. I mean, that's pretty exciting to think about.
Yeah. And, some of the early, maybe slightly more than novelty work you're seeing is teams are ingesting the entire works of well-known pastors or theologians, so could I ask C.S. Lewis a question? Could I ask famous pastor XYZ how he or she might respond? And I think those are our current attempts, right, to act in lieu of there being an overall language model underneath. So we're using maybe some other individual's works because all this language model is ultimately doing is analyzing that set of inputs and figuring out what words might that person have said. And so I think, when we get to that deeper level engine that understands the nuance of what God's word is saying, and also the fact that we can maybe have different interpretations in certain doctrines, but the theology, the core truth is stable and sound.
Yeah.
Then I think we have a really, really interesting foundation to build on.
Yeah. Wow. And that's one of the things that, as we talk about the future, there's stuff that I think is going to be incredibly powerful for the church and for ministry. And just like some who were really nervous about the internet, there will be some who are hesitant, but I also think there's a lot of opportunity. How would you encourage a church leader who, is sort of hearing this and they're like, I don't know, aren't we sort of just then kind of delegating our discipleship or our, the things that are being created, the content to ultimately, a machine or a robot or, I'm trying to think of the church leader who is maybe in that bucket of hesitant to embrace. What's maybe a couple things that they could think about to maybe move a little closer into the embracing these tools?
Yeah. Earlier we wrote a piece called 10 Questions Every Pastor Should Be Asking. I won't go through the whole thing, but I think a few stand out to me. Number one, I would really encourage pastors especially, but all church leaders to just adopt a stance of curiosity. Let's not get too overly influenced by headlines in mainstream press or stories of, like I said, nefarious or negative uses, because those are what's going to grab the headlines, but it doesn't necessarily indict the whole technology as being off limits or bad. I think it's good for us to maintain a curious posture as much as possible. Secondly, I would just say that it's going back to my earlier statement, simply saying like, how could I use AI might actually be the wrong question. Because it would be like, it seems silly today to say, should my church use the internet?
Yeah.
It's like, you want to get more detail. Well, what do you mean? Like, should I have a website? Should I have a mobile app? Should we use email? All of those things rely on the internet. But in its earliest days, we didn't have that context yet. We didn't have all the different point solutions, and AI will be the same. So rather than asking like, should I use AI? You might ask things like, where is a place in my day-to-day, week-to-week operation where I feel like I'm not as efficient, or I'm stealing time from what I really want to do because I have to do this other task. Is there a way that I could maybe steal back some of that time? And like we just discussed, things like translating content or repurposing. Churches spend hours and hours and days on that every week. That's an early example where maybe there's a great tool that helps me do that, and it just happens to be powered in part by AI.
Yeah.
But it's really more about the tool and the task and the ministry value I see from it. I like that question. And then finally, I would just say, and you referenced it earlier a little bit, these generative tools are getting very good.
Yeah.
The text they produce, the images we start to see, it's getting harder to spot the fake. Yeah. Right. So if I read an article, did that person really write it? If I see an image, did the Pope really wear a puffy jacket? Like, all those examples we've seen that people are playing with. I think as a pastor, never before has there been a time where we need to make sure our people, number one, are grounded in God's word, because that is the North Star. And we need to make sure, number two, that we are teaching our people the skill of discernment, because discerning more and more is going to be maybe less about, is this real? Is this fake? And it may be more about, is what I'm seeing, is what I'm reading, does that square up with what I know to be true in God's word?
Yeah.
And if all of us have that litmus test, that radar, so to speak, Proverbs says there's knowledge, there's understanding, and there's wisdom. The internet really helped us take a big leap on the world's knowledge. AI arguably is helping us form some understanding out of that. But wisdom belongs to God. And we're, as you said earlier, we're his image bearers. So I'm not at all concerned that we're going to cede ground on who owns wisdom. God's got that one. But as image bearers, I think it's incumbent on us now more than ever to learn how to discern, how to have that sense of wisdom. Is everything I'm seeing compatible with what I know to be true of God?
Yeah.
And if so, we can rest. If not, then we need to speak out on those things.
Brad, that's a really helpful way of thinking about that. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think that is, I think that is very wise and a good way to continue to move forward. Now, you all at Gloo recently had a hackathon centered around AI in the church. And I know just from, people I follow on social media, saw a lot of really cool things about that. So what are you most excited about that kind of came out of that hackathon? And maybe for those who don't understand what a hackathon is, a brief description.
I was going to say, that was like the number one question we heard first. What the heck is a hackathon? This was awesome. Like, we were blown away. For those who may not be familiar, a hackathon simply means you create a space, a time, usually a pretty compressed amount of time, where you invite people, usually in teams, to come together and solve a problem, solve a challenge together, often with technology, often with code. Although this is open to all skill sets. So we did have developers and programmers, but we had marketing, we had theologians, we had ministry leaders come, and we really didn't know what to expect. We just created the space because we looked at this burgeoning area of innovation around AI. And number one, we said, hey, there needs to be a place where people can come together and thoughtfully talk about, how do we use AI responsibly in the church? Mm-hmm. And then number two, we'd love to create an environment where we can accelerate some of the good thinking and some of the God-given creativity that's going to help us put handles on this thing and use it for ministry. So we had this event in October in Boulder, Colorado, where Gloo is based, and we welcomed about 41 teams, and they developed solutions across really a spectrum of ideas and challenges. It was better than we could imagine. And the camaraderie, the collaboration, everybody was there just saying, like, we've been thinking about AI and we've been looking for a place to exercise this. So we had cash prizes. Like, we put skin in the game for these teams. So we had some of the best and the brightest come. There's a website out there we can put in the show notes where people can actually see the winners and see what was created. You have to remember, this was done in the span of basically 36 hours. We gave people a weekend to come, and it was like true to form, no sleep, lots of pizza, Red Bull, people sleeping on the couch occasionally. Yeah. But we were blown away, as I said, and I leave encouraged that the kingdom is in great hands. There is some incredibly innovative, creative thinking out there. And if these people did in 36 hours what we saw, we can only imagine what's coming in the months and years to follow.
Yeah. Well, we'll certainly share that link. And just love the idea of people coming together in unity, probably from different walks of life, different backgrounds, probably even different denominational theological camps or whatever it might have been, but really unifying around what can we do for the kingdom. I love that. So we'll certainly link to that for people to check that out and to kind of stay up to speed with everything coming out of that. Well, one of the things we love to ask everyone, again, the goal of this podcast is conversations that empower healthy churches. So we love to hear from every one of our guests. In your view, in your experience, what is one essential component of a healthy church?
Well, I think first of all, I love the term healthy church. And we're doing a lot of work here at Gloo to um, kind of move along that thinking. For so long, we've measured things, which we should. We've measured things like attendance and giving. We see those in Acts chapter 2. So there's absolutely no problem there. But our belief is a healthy church also, not instead, but also really is about knowing the people that we're serving, that we're trying to reach, and also knowing if those people are moving closer to God. Are they discipling each other? Are they being discipled? Are we living out Matthew 28 Great Commission? So to us, a healthy church holds itself accountable, not just to filling pews and making sure it makes budget, but also holds itself accountable to, are the people that we steward, are they growing?
Yeah, that's great. We're going to jump into our final 5 here. Those are a little more rapid fire. And so we'll go through those pretty quick. The first one is this: what's one book that you'd recommend to church leaders?
Yeah, this is not a brand new book, but it's a business book that a lot of people might miss. It's called Unlocking the Customer Value Chain. And what I love about it is, and there's some great examples in the book everywhere as we live our lives, where there's things that create value, there's things that destroy value. For example, getting in the car, driving to the grocery store, that takes time. In a sense, it's a little bit of a drag. We don't even think about it because it's so routine, except that now we have things like Instacart and DoorDash.
Yeah.
And so all in our world, we see typical activities being broken down, decoupled, if you will, and then reassembled in ways that are more efficient, more productive. And look, it's not all about the pursuit of efficiency, but I read this book thinking to myself, what would it look like if our experience of church, our experience of discipling each other were really kind of reimagined? And COVID did a lot to speed that process up for a lot of us, but I would recommend Unlocking the Customer Value Chain to every leader, just thinking about what are the things I do that create value and how might I remove the things that destroy it.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Second one, what's the last thing you listened to, whether it's Spotify, Apple Music, that sort of thing?
I mean, sort of hate to admit it, but I do have teenage daughters. So it's the holiday season right now. Taylor Swift's OG Christmas album was playing in the house this weekend.
Hey, respect. There's nothing to be ashamed about jamming out to that. I'm with you. Christmas songs are going. For me, my kids are a little younger, so it's like Greatest Showman, all that stuff. So
there you go.
I'm with
That's
you.
Good.
What is this third one? What is your favorite piece of technology? We do make a little rule. You can't say your phone because everyone's like, my phone, because it is remarkable. But
yeah, I have a love-hate with the phone anyway.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I'd probably say I'm a big EV guy. So I'm really watching with great interest electric vehicles in general.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons. So I'd probably put that top of the list.
Nice. What's a quote or a piece of advice that has stuck with you over the years?
Well, first one that comes to mind, just because you can doesn't mean you should. As I think maps to what we talked about earlier. Just because something's possible doesn't mean it's always a good idea or maps to our mission. So it's good to be thoughtful as we enter any pursuit and make sure it tracks to what God's leading us to do.
Yep. Yeah. Well said. All right. Last one. What is one thing that you'd like to communicate to our audience of church leaders?
Yeah. We didn't talk as much about it today, but another big area that Gloo is involved in, we call it the Explorer Connections program. And we really think that, at least here in the US, and also I think globally from what I hear, there is a harvest. There is a major opportunity made possible largely by digital advances to reach people that we're not reaching. The trick, though, or the exhortation, I guess, for leaders is we need to decide, do we truly love people? Which sounds kind of obvious, but sometimes reaching people through screens, reaching people on social media, through Google, whatever, doesn't mean they're just going to land in our church and attend and lead and serve and give. Sometimes it does, but it does mean that we have an opportunity to get to these people, serve them, pray for them, give them next steps, even when it doesn't mean that they're going to join our church.
Yeah.
And if we adopt a posture where we don't do ministry out of scarcity, but we do it with an abundance mindset, the harvest is absolutely upon us. I can tell you at Gloo, we have to dial back the number of people that are seeking connection because we lack capacity from churches that want to receive and engage with these people digitally. So a little bit of a shameless plug, but we really see if we had every person flowing that wants to connect, our churches would be full.
Yeah.
We would have more people to serve than we have time to serve. So do you really love people is sort of just my phrase that encompasses like, are we doing this for the Great Commission, the making disciples? Or if we look honestly, are we doing this really about institutional growth, filling pews, et cetera? One is not necessarily better than the other, but we need to have both and really evaluate what we're measuring and why we're doing it.
Yeah. I think that's certainly a helpful question for people to wrestle with. Can you give people, if they want to find out more about both what Gloo is doing, but ways they can kind of jump in and even some of what you just shared, can you give people where they can go to find out about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. We have, in fact, back to our AI conversation, we've done some work at Gloo to try to help pastors and leaders cut through the noise. So we have something called the AI and the Church Hub. It's totally free. And it actually is updated routinely with articles, resources. We also have a growing list of apps that are just fun to explore and check out. So that's available at Gloo, and Gloo is spelled Gloo. So it's gloo.us/AI. Okay. And I'd invite every leader to go there. Free account, you can set it up. And we'll feed you updates on, what's new and what's useful that you should check out. And once you're in there, it avails you also of incredible resources from a lot of our friends and partners that are all there to equip you. So would love to invite every leader listening to check out the hub.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're going to link to that and the other resources that we talked about during our conversation. But Brad, really appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom with church leaders, but also to help them as, we all kind of look to navigate the time that we're in and what lies ahead and, do our best to embrace technology to reach more people. So really appreciate that and your time. And we thank you, those of you listening, watching this conversation. Really hope that it's been helpful for you and hope that it ultimately leads to healthy ministry and empowering your church. If it was helpful, encourage you to share it with somebody. You can subscribe, link, leave a review, comment, all the podcast things. And we would appreciate that. Helps us get this podcast into more church leaders' ears and hopefully help more churches. So thanks again for your time today, and we'll see you next time.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple to use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.